Hello there and welcome. My name is Laselma Ray from Now Novel. We are a company dedicated to helping you finish your novel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you 6 top tips to writing your setting. The examples that we are going to be using today are from some of the most famous authors in the world. We're going to be taking a little journey to Hogwarts, pop by Middle Earth for a bit, take a stroll to Narnia, and have a little bit of a look at London through Charles Dickens' eyes. As always, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and comment down if you have any questions. I will be sure to answer them. The first tip that I have today is give detail to your story's setting. Let's take a look at J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, one of the most famous series in the world, and one of the most famous settings, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Like and subscribe if you are still waiting for your letter. The key ingredient to creating a magical world is creating that magical and mystical elsewhere. This magical elsewhere takes us from the ordinary and recognizable world into this new and fantastical world with creatures and landscapes. One of the many reasons that children and adults alike fell in love with this series is because of the details and intricacy that J.K. Rowling wove into her settings. She created a striking difference between the initial setting of the Dudleys' ordinary, suburban, and oppressive home to the majestic towers and mystical wonder of Hogwarts Castle. Think of your setting as a character in your story. The same way you would give details to your protagonist or antagonist. Give detail to your setting to really captivate and transport your reader in your story world. Now Novel has an idea finding tool that is dedicated to this. As you plan and create your setting, think about how your character's environment unfolds as the story progresses. As you may already know, your setting is the place and time your story is set in, and creates the overall tone and mood of your story. I'm going to be using visual references of the film to show you how Hogwarts itself progresses as the story progresses. Something you will notice as the story progresses. The plotline of the story becomes darker, and thus the setting becomes more eerie and gloomy. Here we can see how Hogwarts was portrayed in the first 4 movies. Although it has dark tones, blues, and grays, this does not compare to the final image of how Hogwarts is in Deathly Hallows. So just to give you a reference, here is Hogwarts in the first few films, and here is Hogwarts in the last film. The closer the protagonist Harry Potter comes to facing the antagonist Voldemort, the darker the setting becomes. It both reflects Harry's own state of mind and the evil that is consuming the world around him. It is even more apparent in the final scenes after Voldemort is defeated. After Voldemort is defeated, we can see how the 3 main characters come out and emerge from Hogwarts. We see that the sun is shining again. There's glimmers of light, which is a symbol for hope and a new beginning. Moving on to tip number 2. You can always learn from other authors' vivid story setting. We're now going to be looking at Charles Dickens' description of London in the 19th century. If you're looking for examples of writers who write real places and cities, Dickens is a great source for that. Here's an example of a writer who creates believable and mood-filled settings. Dickens' London is almost like a character on its own, just like Hogwarts is. We can see this writing example of London in 2 of his novels, Great Expectations and The Tale of Two Cities. The public houses with gas lights burning inside were already open. By degrees, other shops began to be unclosed, and a few scattered people were met with. Then came straggling groups of laborers going to their work. Then men and women with fish baskets on their heads, donkey carts laden with vegetables, chase carts filled with livestock or whole carcasses of meat, milkwomen with pails, an unbroken concourse of people trudging out with various supplies to the eastern suburbs of the town. As they approached the city, the noise and traffic gradually increased. When they threaded the streets between Shoreditch and Smithfield, it had swelled into a roar of sound and bustle. With these few sentences, Dickens describes how the outskirts of the town is moving in towards the lively, busy inner city. You could even argue that Dickens personifies London by writing the word city in a capital C. If you want to include a real-life city in your novel, find an author who writes about that city and use them as an example. Examine how those authors have created those spaces successfully. Tip number 3, make your setting contribute actively to your plot's direction. What does this mean? Let's take a look at J.R. Tolkien. What's his name? Tolkien. Tolkien's Middle-earth. Tolkien's Middle-earth. Wow. Don't come for me in the comments about the pronunciation of his name, okay? I just had a brain fart and that happens. From The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, we have Middle-earth. The terrain of the story sets up the ingenuity and bravery of the adventurers. This is an example of an effective, active setting and world building. Tolkien brought so much detail into the setting that he even included a map of the world, Middle-earth. And including maps had become common practice in a lot of fantasy books. Here is Middle-earth. Very nice, very detailed. We love that. Even in the film adaptations of Tolkien's books, we can see the detail and depth of his vivid world and the way it tests and pushes each of the characters to its limits. We follow Frodo's journey from the Shire all the way to Mordor. Visually, we can see how the setting changes as Frodo's journey progresses. The more dangerous and treacherous the journey becomes, the more ominous the setting. The peril of Frodo's journey is amplified through the setting, and thus it shows his evolution as a character. Tip number 4, show the effects of time in the setting. Showing the way that time has affected a place is a great tool in your arsenal because it can show you how an event has affected a certain setting. Think about how time would have changed or not changed this place, and what does this say about the setting in question? For example, in Evelyn, I don't know how to pronounce the was? I'm gonna quickly look it up on Google.
How to pronounce wa?
The following pronunciation is brought to you by pronouncenames.com.
Evelyn Waugh.
Evelyn Waugh. Great.
Back to business.
For example, in Evelyn Waugh's Brideshead Revisited, he creates a strong sense of history through its setting. He shows how the protagonist Charles Ryder visits his friend's family mansion before and after World War II, and the decline of this mansion after the events. It creates a character on its own and symbolizes how historical events affect our memories and physical spaces. Especially if you are writing fiction that is set in a real time and place, you want to make sure that you do thorough research on this era. Read up about the conditions of the time and place that you are writing about, and research real-life people and events so that you can gain some inspiration and accuracy. The 5th tip is using your setting symbolically. Now for the trip through the wardrobe. Setting not only creates the backdrop for your story, but it may also supply symbolic meaning and messaging. Within the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis, Lewis used Narnia as a symbol of heaven and Aslan as a symbol of God. Part of the plot becomes an allegorical reference to the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. The endless winter created by Jadis, the White Witch, symbolizes the suspension of the natural order of death and rebirth. Initially, Narnia is in a perpetual state of winter and death, creating the tension within the story as Narnia's struggling inhabitants await for its rebirth. When crafting your novel, think about what the time and place could symbolize within your story. This novel is a great example for how setting can be used as an allegorical reference for religious beliefs such as the afterlife and more. This 6th and final tip today is using the 5 senses to deepen the setting description. As you may know, your 5 senses are sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch. If you struggle to create a vivid and rich description of your setting, think of your other senses. Don't only rely on visuals. If your setting is in a forest, what are the most prominent sounds and smells? Has it been raining, and does that influence the smell of the earth? Do you hear mainly silence, or is there an owl hooting in the distance? Or are there a symphony of insects? You're allowed to use that line for your novel, by the way. I give you permission. What great imagery I'm creating. What does the ground feel like under the character's feet? Is it soft, dense, hard, or comfortable? These seemingly small details can really characterize your setting, and also the relationship your protagonist has with it. And most importantly, it influences the relationship your reader has with the setting. Let's use another example from Dickens' novels Hard Times. Here is a short description of the city Coketown. Notice how he includes visuals, smells, and sounds. It was a town of red brick, or of brick that would have been red if the smoke and ashes had allowed it. But as matters stood, it was a town of unnatural red and black. It had a black canal in it, and a river that ran purple with ill-smelling dye. and vast piles of buildings full of windows where there was a rattling and a trembling all day long, and where the piston of a steam engine worked monotonously up and down like the head of an elephant in a state of melancholy madness. In this short extract, you can feel the many sensory elements that Dickens writes about. He includes the smell of ill-smelling dye and the sounds of steam piston engines. The descriptions conjure a vivid mental image of the town. And also with the inclusion of ill and melancholy and madness, it shows the relationship that the narrator has with the town and creates a strong sense of tone and mood. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. That is it for today. Here is a summary of the 6 tips to create an in-depth story setting. That was a mouthful. Number 1, use detail in your setting. Number 2, learn from other authors. Number 3, make your setting vital to the plot. Number 4, show how time affects the setting. Number 5, use symbolic or allegorical references. And finally, number 6, evoke the 5 senses to create vivid imagery. If you have any questions or need any help with building your setting, leave a comment down below or comment down below your favorite setting description from a novel. We would love to read them.